ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's presentation, The Roots of the Oldest Hatred and How They Still Spread Today, given by Miss Lacy Watson. My name is Gavin Wolcher. I'm the director of this library. This is going to be recorded, so I ask that you silence your phones right now, please. Let me give a brief introduction to Lacy. Lacy has been an English teacher, language arts at Billings West since 2011 and has been drawn to the Holocaust education her entire life. Growing up in rural Montana without a synagogue or a Jewish community, she found some initial connection to her identity when learning about the Holocaust at home and in public school. Her desire to honor the history of the Holocaust in her teaching led her to Europe to study with the Holocaust and Jewish Resistance Teachers Program in 2014. After this life-changing experience, she earned a Master's of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies through Gratz College. Lacy works with the Olga Langel Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights as a satellite seminar facilitator and serves on a teacher advisory panel for the organization. On Monday night, we had Peter Metzelaar here, who spoke. Some of you were at that presentation. I'm going to give the same challenge to all of you as I gave to that group on Monday night. I want you to think about this. I want you, more importantly, I want you to share what you learned tonight. I want you to share with your family. I want you to share with your friends. This is a topic that we owe it to so many to remember, to reflect, and to educate. So please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Lacy Watson.
Can you hear me? There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Lacy. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your lives to come tonight. It really means a lot. And I will start this with the caveat that I typically stand in front of teenagers, which is much less frightening than adults. So if I'm a little bit nervous, that's why. But I'm honored and thankful to be here tonight, and I'm so thankful that you all are here. And there's lots of friendly faces, so that makes me feel better about things. So the library got a hold of me and asked if I would do something for the programming with the traveling exhibit. And I thought about what I really would like to share. And what my students always ask me about when I teach about the Holocaust. I teach a semester-long literature of the Holocaust course, and they always ask me, like, why the Jews? Why Jewish people? And they typically never know. And I'm guessing some of you also probably have that question, maybe? Maybe not. And this will just be a review, and that's okay too. So I wanted to start actually before we get into that with this notion of what does it mean to be Jewish. And I know there are some fellow members of the tribe with us tonight, so we will likely have some differing opinions on how to answer this question, and that's wonderful. So we can look at it in a number of ways, that there is this identity and lineage of being a Jewish person. It's how you're born, it's the family that you come with. And that looks lots of different ways. There's no one way to be a Jewish person. This, of course, comes with the religion, which you can be born into or convert to. And then there's this notion of Jewish law, which states that if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. So that's me. My mother's side of the family is Jewish, so I'm Jewish. I'm not half Jewish, even though my dad's side of the family is Jewish. I'm just Jewish. And that, to me, is super important, because that mostly has died out in my family. So if I don't keep that, it disappears. And then the last way, I guess, sort of is this notion of Jewish secularism. You can be a Jew who's not religious, and you're still Jewish, even if you've never practiced or you've never had that cultural connection, still Jewish. So this gets kind of tricky, particularly when we get to the Holocaust and how the Nazis and their collaborators quantified who was Jewish. But so this is sort of what it means to be Jewish, right? Like, you can be a practicing religious person and have the lineage, or one or the other, or you can be a convert. Kind of tricky. All right. So I want to start. There's lots of text on this slide. There will be a few that are like that. I want to start and say that what you learned tonight may be upsetting to you, particularly if you're Christian. Where anti-Semitism comes from can be deeply painful for people. So I just want to say that please know that this is not meant to be an attack on you or your beliefs. It is simply the historical facts of where this hatred comes from and sort of how it spread. So we know Christianity comes about from Jesus, who was a Jew, and this church springs up after his death, and mostly the people who became Christians were Jews. So there's a man, John Chrysostom, who was a preacher and a lecturer. He would go and talk to people about Christianity, and he had some very incendiary things to say about the Jewish people. So this slide and the next few come from a homily that he wrote on Jewish people. So I'm going to do the thing you're not supposed to do, and I'm going to read some slides to you, but maybe you can't see it in the back. I don't know. So this one, and this is, I will totally admit, taken out of context. The homily itself is quite long. It is linked in the presentation. If you're interested, just search, homily against the Jews, and you will find it. But he says, "What is this disease? The festivals of the pitiful and the miserable Jews are soon to march upon us, one after the other and in quick succession. The Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Tabernacles, the fasts. There are many in our ranks who will say they think as we do, yet some of those are going to watch the festivals, and others will join the Jews in keeping their feasts and observing their fasts. I wish to drive this pervasive custom from the church right now. My homilies against the Anomians can be put off to another time, and the postponement would cause no harm. But now that the Jewish festivals are close by and at the very door, if I should fail to cure those who are sick with the Judaizing disease, I'm afraid that, because of their ill-suited association and deep ignorance, some Christians may partake in the Jews' transgressions. Once they have done so, I fear my homilies on those transgressions will be in vain. For if they hear no words from me today, then they will join the Jews in their fasts. Once they have committed this sin, it will be useless for me to apply the remedy." So a lot of words, but I think really the crux of what is happening here is that we have Jewish people who have converted to Christianity, and maybe some of their friends and their family haven't done so. So they want to still do Jewish things and hang out with people that they love and care about that are Jewish. And early members of the church see this as a threat. We can't have people convert but not fully convert. So if we demonize Judaism and Jews, hopefully our new converts will stay away. Make sense, sort of? Yeah, okay. I think I'm not going to read this one. I want to look at this last one. So this is later on in the homily. This is the second part. He says, "Although such beasts are unfit for work, they are fit for killing. And this is what happened to the Jews. While they were making themselves unfit for work, they grew fit for slaughter. This is why Christ said, 'But as for these, my enemies, who do not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slay them.' You Jews should have fasted then, when drunkenness was doing those terrible things to you, when your gluttony was giving birth to your ungodliness, not now. Now your fasting is untimely and an abomination. Who said so? Isaiah himself, when he called out in a loud voice, 'I did not choose this fast, say the Lord.' Why? You quarrel and squabble when you fast, and you strike those subject to you with your fists. But if you fasting was an abomination when you were striking your fellow slaves, does it become acceptable now that you have slain your master? How could that be right?" It goes on like this. So I think early Christendom, the notion is to keep converts Christian and to demonize Jews. And honestly, I really think that this is it. This is the whole wellspring of where this hatred comes from, is that Jews are different. We want them to convert to Christianity, and if they can't accept the yoke of Christ, then they're doing things in all the wrong way. Pretty upsetting. All right, so please know that this is sort of like the least you need to know about this, and I will kind of jump around a little bit. And I have tried to cite my sources for the most part. Librarians, I'm looking at you. And English teachers, please know that most of my slides and images are sourced, and I have a works cited at the end. But, okay, so during the Middle Ages, that's a big jump from like year 400 to the Middle Ages, but that's where we're going. So there is this notion that the plague is caused by Jewish people poisoning the water systems, that Jews want nothing but bad for people, and so they are responsible for the plague. Of course, we know the plague is mostly spread by fleas that are on rodents and on people. We also know that, warring soldiers would take their dead who had died from the plague and like catapult them into other places to infect people. Biological warfare has been around a long time, but it certainly wasn't the Jews poisoning the well. This image is a depiction, a woodcutting of supposedly a Jew poisoning the well, and lots of imagery here that we could unpack for quite some time. This brings us to this blood libel, this notion that near to Passover, Jews would kidnap Christian children, typically babies, murder them, and then use their blood to make matzah. I have no idea where this notion came from. It's insanity, but was widely accepted as truth for a long time. There was a case in the 1960s where a person was charged for having done this, up until the 1960s. So we're looking at, the second century all the way until the 1960s. So we have this first case of William of Norwich in 1144, this first recorded case, I should say, of someone being murdered for being accused of this. The Jews of Norwich, England, are charged with ritual murder and the body of a young boy who was discovered to be stabbed to death in the woods. Okay, yes, people have always been terrible. Someone killed this little boy, but it certainly wasn't Jews to use his blood for making matzah. And this will recur later as well. So here's an image that portrays that, another woodcutting. Every year when I teach about the Holocaust, every single year I have a student who will say, yeah, well, the Jews killed Jesus, though. And people believe this, that Jewish people killed Jews and that all Jews are responsible for the death of Christ, when it's been clearly shown that it was the Romans who did this. So our definition here is that this comes from Matthew 27:24 through 25. His blood be on us and on our children, also known as this blood curse. So that's sort of where this idea comes from. Paul also had some things to say about this. But then it just gets adopted into the church, and it goes from, the writing of the New Testament until today. This is a person from Westboro Baptist who has, I'm sure other terrible things to say. But this notion that Jews killed Jesus certainly is pervasive. Again, okay, so this is another one of those places where I'm going to say this may be harmful to you or saddening, I guess. Martin Luther was initially thinking that if he could convert the Jews, it would be great. And then once he realized that that wasn't going to happen, he made all of these pronouncements against Jews. So he writes, I had made up my mind to write no more, either about the Jews or against them. But since I learned that these miserable and accursed people do not cease to lure themselves, even us, that is, the Christians, I've published this little book so that I might be found among those who oppose such poisonous activities of the Jews, who warn the Christians to be on their guard against them. I would not have believed that a Christian could be duped by the Jews into taking their exile and wretchedness upon himself. However, the devil is the god of the world, and wherever God's word is absent, he has an easy task. not only with the weak, but also with the strong. May God help us. Amen. What shall we Christians do with this rejected and condemned people, the Jews? Since they live among us, we dare not tolerate their conduct, now that we are aware of their lying and reviling and blaspheming. If we do, we become sharers in their lies, cursing the Jews. With prayer and the fear of God, we must practice a sharp mercy to see whether we might save at least a few of them from the glowing flames. We dare not avenge ourselves. Vengeance, 1,000 times worse than we could wish them, already has them by the throat. I shall give you my sincere advice. First, to set fire to their synagogues or schools, and to bury and cover with dirt whatever will not burn, so that no man will ever again see a stone or cinder of them. This is to be done in honor of our Lord and of Christendom, so that God might see that we are Christians, and do not condone or knowingly tolerate such public lying, cursing, and blaspheming of his Son and of the Christians. For whatever we tolerated in the past unknowingly, and I myself was unaware of it, will be pardoned by God. But if we, now that we are informed, were to protect and shield such a house for the Jews, existing right before our very nose, in which they lie about, blaspheme, curse, vilify, and defame Christ and us, as we heard above, it would be the same as if we were doing all of this, and even worse ourselves, as very well know. So again, this notion that because Jews aren't Christian, they are the root of all of the problems, that there is this association with with Judaism and with the devil. A colleague of mine told me a story. He used to teach middle school in Denver, and he had a student who was Jewish, and another student came up to this little girl and said, "Well, where are your horns?" Believing that that was a thing. And I think that this really comes from this centuries-old idea that is spread by a lot of times the church to keep people coming back, I guess. All right. So again, kind of jumping around in time and place, we have this notion of anti-Judaism versus anti-Semitism. So the notion that anti-Judaism is this hatred and dislike of the Jewish religion, and anti-Semitism is this hatred and dislike of people who are Jewish, regardless of their religious affiliation. So, of course, in Spain, things are not good for the Jews. It starts out with these laws against Jews. In 1437, there are pogroms, which are organized roundups and killings of Jewish people, and this happens all over the European continent for a very long time. In 1483, Jews are ordered by Ferdinand to wear a piece of red cloth that identifies them as Jewish, and then in 1488, we have Jewish ghettos established in Spain. So interesting side note, apparently Ferdinand and Isabella were not particularly anti-Semitic. They had Jewish physicians. It was the populace of Spain who was so up in arms against Jews. This is what I've read. It could be, maybe they're giving more credit than is worth. So throughout the Inquisition, heretics of all types are tried and often killed. Conversos being a large number of this. So a converso is a convert from Judaism to Christianity. But the clutch is that you don't have a choice. You are forced to convert or be kicked out of Spain or killed. So I have just a few case studies here. I would argue that, it is the Spanish Inquisition that sort of makes this shift from anti-Judaism to anti-Semitism. From before, the hatred was based in religious belief, and from this point on, it's very often that it is based on the personhood. So we have Juan del Hoyo, who was this orphan who's raised by conversos, so formerly Jewish people or formerly practicing Jews, in Ciudad Real. And then he is convicted of, quote, believing in the laws of Moses. He is sentenced to a Christian re-education and life imprisonment. And there's very little evidence against him, just this notion that he believes in the laws of Moses. And then we have Marina Gonzalez, who is burned at the stake for wearing a red skirt. So she was also a converso. She was brought up in a Jewish household. She, knew and practiced. She became converted. And she is told that she kept the Sabbath by thinking about it. So the only way that she practiced her Judaism was to think about the Sabbath on the Sabbath. And for that, they burned her at the stake. Well, and for wearing the red skirt, which was prohibited. But because she was a converso, because she was formerly Jewish, they burned her at the stake for an infraction of wearing the wrong color. Our next case study is this of Inez Lopez. She was a practicing Catholic who observed Jewish mourning rituals, which means likely she sat Shiva and did the things that Jews do when someone dies. She was tried twice, first for this observing Jewish rituals, and for that she is going to receive Christian re-education. But then later, she is in church, in Catholic church, and she doesn't make the sign of the cross, and instead of saying in the name of the Son, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, she just says in the name of the Father. And because of this, the inquisitors decided that she was a crypto-Jew, secretly practicing Judaizing, trying to get other Jewish people to be Jews instead of Catholics, and they burned her at the stake. So this shift from hating someone for their religious beliefs to hating someone for who they are, I would argue takes place here. I know other people would argue separately or differently. But it's this notion that no matter what you do, you can't be good enough. You can't be trusted to actually have converted. You can't be anything other than a Jew who should be punished. We also know, of course, that Ferdinand and Isabella end up kicking out all of the Jews of Spain. This brings us to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which can still be purchased today. So this is a book that is written that claims that all the Jews of the world run everything, that there's a secret cabal of Jews that have control over all the world governments, the finance, all of the things. And it is widely distributed and believed to be true. But it has been proven over and over again that it's a hoax, that some anti-Semite wrote this with no actual bearing in fact or truth, but it's been widely believed across the country, across the world. And you can still purchase it today. So this is an interesting, how many of us have seen the exhibit in the library? Okay, if you haven't, I really highly suggest it. Also, Ken Burns just made a phenomenal documentary that's based on the exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in DC that talks quite a bit about Henry Ford. So Henry Ford was a very noted anti-Semite. He had a picture of Hitler hanging in his office. He had a really widespread newspaper publication that was an anti-Semitic rag. It was the second most popular newspaper in the country. And then he also has this book, The International Jew, that is based primarily on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In my family, I grew up and we didn't buy like Braun or Krups because of family heritage connected to things like this. All right, so this brings us to more modern times, to Nazi propaganda, which is insidious. And propaganda, of course, being this idea that we are spreading an idea that is meant to persuade and not to inform, right? And propaganda we can see today in all sorts of different formats. Every commercial you've ever watched is propaganda. But for the Nazis and their collaborators, propaganda was absolutely a tool. So I'm going to see if we can open this really fast. This comes from Echoes and Reflections. I know I have some fellow educators in here with me tonight. And this is a phenomenal resource if you've ever used it. Oops, let's do this. All right. So this is some excerpts from Hitler's Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And I'm not going to read all of this. We'll just look at a little bit of it. To what an extent the whole existence of this people is based on a continuous lie is shown incomparably by the protocols of the elders of Zion, so infinitely hated by the Jews. They are based on a forgery. The Frankfurter Zeitung, the German newspaper, moans and screams once a week, the best proof that they are authentic. For once this book has become the common property of a people, the Jewish menace may be considered as broken. Hence today I believe that I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. With satanic Jew in his face, the black-haired Jewish youth lurks in wait for the unsuspecting girl whom he defiles with his blood, thus stealing her from her people. With every means, he tries to destroy the racial foundation of the people he has set out to subjugate. For a racially pure people, which is conscious of its blood, can never be enslaved by the Jew. In this world, he will forever be master over bastards and bastards alone. And so he tries systematically to lower the racial level by a continuous poisoning of the individual. Culturally, he contaminates art, literature, the theater, makes a mockery of natural feeling, overthrows all concepts of beauty and sublimity, of the noble and the good, and instead drags men down into the sphere of his own base nature. So we know that Adolf Hitler writes this book about his struggle, and it is full of just hatred of Jews, essentially. And it is the first real piece of Nazi propaganda, I would argue, that is widely disseminated. So this sort of comes back to that question that we started with at the beginning of who is a Jew or what is a Jew. And according to Hitler and to his collaborators, it was this purely racial idea. So it didn't matter if you converted. If you had 2 Jewish grandparents, that was it. You were Jewish. And that was enough to, have you be targeted as a victim of the Holocaust. So I'm going to come back. All right, so I'm going to ask you to just I've been talking for a minute, so I'm going to ask you to take a second and just maybe turn and talk to some people that you're sitting near. So how does Hitler's writing reflect previous anti-Semitic stereotypes? What new ideas appear in his writings? And then how did Nazi ideology build on older and well-known anti-Semitic stereotypes and religious hatred from the past? Why maybe did the Nazis do this? So just take 2 minutes, have your own time to talk for a second, and I'll be back. It's okay, don't be scared. You can tell that you have a teacher in front of you tonight, can't you? Yeah, go ahead. So he's actually a saint. He's been sainted by the Christian Church, the Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and a bunch of other churches. But he was like a preacher. Yeah. 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 All right, 30 seconds. All right, I will ask that we come back together. Oh, if I can control teenagers, I got this, I think. I hope. That's fair. That is true. All right, so hopefully you had a chance to think about this really briefly, but this is sort of a new anti-Semitism. Often a lot of my students think that this anti-Semitism started from Hitler, and clearly that's not the case. He had 2,000 years of experience to draw from, and an awful lot of scapegoating to do for the problems that Germany had at the time. Oh, I do need to show you this. All right, so some more propaganda. This is a book meant for children, often used in German schools, called Der Giftpilz, which means the poisonous mushroom. Another resource from Echoes and Reflections. So the premise of the book is that Jewish people should be treated like poisonous mushrooms. Unless you can tell a poisonous mushroom from a good one, you never know if you're going to be poisoned. So here's what to look out for. And this, like I said, was used as curriculum in elementary schools. Just as it is difficult to distinguish between a poisonous mushroom and an edible mushroom, it is difficult to distinguish between a good Jew and a lying, thieving Jew. And I'm not going to go through all of this. We don't have time for that, but I will show you a few of the images. When I do this with my students, we spend some time just doing analysis, and I'll have everyone go around and say, like, what do you notice? Just tell me one thing that you notice about this image. And everybody sort of notices different things, but there are some major stereotypes and tropes being displayed here. Oh yeah, here's a good one. All right, I will read the caption for this one. Taken from the children's book, The Poisonous Mushroom, the inscription in this picture reads, "The Jewish nose is wide at the end and looks like the number 6. The number 6 is connected to Satan, and his explanation of the Jewish nose gives it a devilish meaning. Even though the message of the caricature is a mythological nature, it is presented as truth in that it is being taught by a respectable Aryan teacher in a normal class." And that absolutely happened. As a teacher, I think really carefully about how I teach my classes, because I never want to do what those Nazi teachers did and indoctrinate students. Like, that is not at all my job. That's not what I'm there to do. And I don't know if shame is the right word, but it saddens me that our profession has that history, that those teachers were engaged in that. All right. So more propaganda. In Germany, there was a film and then an art exhibit as well called Der ewige Jude, so the Eternal Jew, that just really focuses on these stereotypes and is just quite sickening, really. Here is a still taken from the film. A few years ago when I was working on my master's, I found the majority of the film on YouTube. It's no longer on there, thankfully. But so in this, Jewish people are compared to rats. Here we have another, and I think the explanation here is really nice. I'll just give you a moment and let you read that. I don't have to read to you all night. All right, and then some more indoctrination for children. This was a game, one of many. This link is a whole incredible article that the Smithsonian put together of artifacts of Nazi propaganda specifically for children. Little Hitler Youth looking like Himmel dolls. And then this game called Juden raus, which means Jews get out. So the whole point of the game was to evict the Jews from the German homeland. Okay, so here is an image from the propaganda magazine in Germany, Julius Strecker's Der Stürmer. And it comes back to this idea of the ritual murder, the blood libel, okay? The Ritualmord is ritual murder. And then we have this same image of Jews murdering all these little Christian babies for their blood to make matzah, supposedly. So this trope didn't go away. It comes back. It's as virulent as ever. And we have propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels saying, if you tell a big enough if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. If you tell a lie for 2,000 years, it becomes the truth, or some version of it. All right. How many of you as children believed in Santa Claus? Show of hands. Okay, why? Because your parents said, like, your parents said that Santa was there. You woke up in the morning, there's presents. It was Santa, obviously. Why else? Culturally, it's in the media. It's in the schools. So if you were told a lie by people that you trust, and it's everywhere you look, you believe it, right? I mean, I believed in Santa Claus as a kid too, because people that I trusted and loved told me that I was real. So I think this is a nice analogy for how people can come to believe these sorts of heinous lies. Oh, more Santa Claus is coming to town. You know, songs, which there for sure were against Jewish people as well. I am going to skip this bit in effort to save us a little bit of time. So really what this all comes down to is dehumanization. And this is this process of making people less than human, because it's so easy to do bad things to people if you don't believe they're people, if you don't see their humanity. And that's what anti-Semitism has done, and it is what is happening today. Okay, so this brings us to today. I told you we would jump around in time and space, and that we're just dipping our toe into the subject matter. So the ADL tells us that anti-Semitic attacks and events are way up, and this is just in 2021. This is not just in 2021. It's a trend that has been happening. We think about the Tree of Life shooting. We think about the synagogue in San Diego, about all sorts of violence against Jewish people. Oh, Kanye. Does everybody know what's happening with Kanye West? If not, Kanye West is a rapper who has been real famous for a long time, and a few weeks ago in mid-October, he sent out this tweet that he was going to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. And then after that, he was interviewed by Alex Jones, who is just lost a huge lawsuit because he was saying that Sandy Hook didn't actually happen and that they were all crisis actors. So Alex Jones interviews him and he says, "I like Hitler." Okay, we could debate about why Kanye is doing what he's doing. People say he's got mental illness, a traumatic brain injury. Those things are probably true. But this is super dangerous. He has a huge platform. All of us in Billings, Montana tonight are talking about this guy. And my students are talking about this. They know what's going on, right? Yeah. To normalize something this much is extremely dangerous. This can't be normal. Anybody know who this is? Okay, if not, I was just telling my daughter about this tonight. This is Tanya Gersh. She lives in Whitefish, Montana. She is a real estate agent. And a few years ago, she was working with a customer whose son was Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer, if you don't know, is a noted white supremacist, white nationalist. He's the punched a Nazi. He's the guy that got punched. He was real famous for that for a while. So Spencer finds out that his mom is being represented by a Jewish real estate agent, and he calls for a troll storm and for her to be doxxed. So to be doxxed means that hackers steal all of your private information and release it to the public. Your address, where you live, your social security number, your financial information. And so this happens. And she receives multiple death threats through the mail, on the phone. Someone takes an image of Auschwitz and superimposes her children's faces onto it. This is in Whitefish, Montana. This isn't somewhere else. This is here. She did win a huge lawsuit. Thank God for this, because it was heinous. All right, so I do a lot of education work on the Holocaust, and it's a really heavy topic. And so I never want to just leave you and be like, yep, everything's terrible. And so what do we do with this? I really liked the challenge that was put forth at the beginning of tonight, this idea that we have to do something with this. So I say expand your circle. Most years when I teach the Holocaust literature class, I ask my students, how many of you know a Jewish person? And they're all like, you know me. I'm like, well, all of you should raise your hands. So if you don't have any Jewish friends, like, try that. We're good people. And if you can't do that, if you don't know any Jewish people, read. Expand your mind. Come to public library events. And think critically. Like, we are in a weird informational age where we're given propaganda all the time, and we have to sift through it and figure out what is real and what is not and who is in charge. I should have put vote in really big letters on here too. But vote. Be engaged and vote. That's super important. This last one I think is the most critical, and that's to stand up. It's to have hard conversations with people. And when you see people being targeted, when you see oppression, when you see anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, ableism, any of those things, have those hard conversations. And try to bring people in instead of calling them out. It's way more effective. You know that old adage about flies and honey. So have hard conversations. My other thing is this. Typically at school, I wear a lanyard, and it has a little keychain that I got at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it says hope on it. It was artwork that was done in Terezin by a child there. And it's so that I have a physical reminder on my person at all times to have hope. If you guys have been watching the news, West High has been a real interesting place the last 2 weeks. There was a huge swastika drawn on one of our bathroom walls, along with a shooting threat that was supposed to happen today. So for me, having that physical reminder to have hope is really important. It's a choice. Hope is a choice. And I have to tell you, gosh, I'm trying not to get emotional, but my students give me hope. I've never seen students who are more accepting, who are more open-minded, who are more critical thinking than they are. And it's every year, it's more and more. We have amazing kids. The future really is in good hands. So my invitation to you is to stand up, to have hard conversations, and more than anything, have hope. Thank you. And we do have some time, 15 or so minutes, if people have questions or want to talk. Hi.
I live near, I'll come closer. Thank you. I live near Pioneer Park, and I'm in the park pretty often. And there's a little area of the park where certain people go to practice their graffiti. And it's just a certain area of the park. And if there's other people here who go to the park, you might know where that place is. On the fence, on the picnic table, on the tree. And so anyway, my family and I had a little family kickball game in that area last summer. We chose that area not knowing about the graffiti because we needed shade and we need kind of an open area between the trees because it was a hot day. So anyhow, we all get assembled. There's like 20 some of us. And my 20-year-old granddaughter says, "Hey, Grandma, we can't do this here. Do you see that? And do you see that? And do you see that?" And I hadn't seen it. And so we covered some of it up with blankets, but we went ahead and just ignored it and didn't call attention to it. But so I had a goal that I was going to go back to the park with my spray can and vandalize the vandalism. And so I finally did that last week. I mean, there was a warm day, and I thought, man, I haven't done that yet. I need to get that done. But
That's good trouble.
so what was going on, especially with a couple of the areas, is it was attacking African American women. It's horrible obscenity, drawings and words and whatever. and I needed 2 spray cans because I wasn't able to completely cover it with just 1 can. So I have to go back when the weather gets warm. But should I contact somebody at senior high?
I would call the Parks Department is
Call
what I
the
would do,
city
just
of-
because I
yeah,
wouldn't. I
call
would
the
really
city
be
of
sad if you
Dallas.
got a ticket or arrested or something
Oh.
for vandalism. I mean, I would
For
definitely call that
vandalizing
good
the
trouble, but I
vandalism?
think the Parks
Yeah, I'm
Department
worried.
is who you would want to get a hold
You
of.
know, I took a picture of it with my phone before I sprayed it. And I do know the guy who's the caretaker of the park, and I'm sure he's, you know, appalled with it too. But yeah, I will call the Parks Department, but I sort of feel like maybe I should contact senior high because it's an area where when the weather's warm and during their lunchtime, a lot of kids assemble there.
For sure, yeah, it's not a
So,
bad idea. At least let them know, and they have an officer there that could keep an eye on it, probably.
But
too.
it was disturbing because it's young people who are gathering in that area, and it was just overtly anti-African American women. So, or black women, period. So,
Well, thank you for that.
yeah, so, you know, keep your spray cans handy. Just be careful.
Somebody over here had a question. Go ahead.
You mentioned reading. Do you have books that you recommend?
Oh
your
gosh,
students read?
yes. I mean, depending on what area of interest you have, there's loads and loads.
You don't have any specific that you.
I mean, one of my favorite of all times is The Red Tent by Anita Diamond. It's fiction, but it is just phenomenal. And it's sort of like Jews in old times and women. It focuses particularly on women, yeah. People of the Book by Gwendolyn Brooks is also really great, too. Yeah. Other questions? Go ahead.
My question is, making in school?
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
Good.
Primarily in English classes, I would say, and science classes, too.
I have,
Library.
I have a feeling that many of
I think you might be right.
those. That's a pet peeve of mine.
It's just easier, I think, to believe what everybody tells you without having to think about it and think about hard truths. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Oh, Carrie.
So, we see these kind of same themes and tropes repeated throughout history. And some of these things immediately came to mind that we've seen recently. But do you see in modern day America or the world these same things being repeated currently besides the Kanye?
Absolutely. All the time. All the time. My daughter went to one of our schools here, and she faced a lot of anti-Semitism in schools. Like, she told me, and she just told me this, she's 18, she just graduated high school. She just told me that in middle school, some student wrote a number on her arm because they knew she's Jewish. Like, so yes, there certainly is still anti-Semitism. There are still these tropes today, for sure. Like I said, every year I have a student that thinks that Jews killed Jesus. That's still a common belief. Yeah.
How do you think the U.S. compares to some of the rest of the world community?
I can't speak on that a ton. I would say that we have our own set of issues for sure. I know in Poland they have major problems still with anti-Semitism. They have something called Radio Maria that is essentially state-sanctioned anti-Semitic radio programming. They have, in the spring, they have this effigy festival where they make an effigy of a Jewish person and it's huge, and then they beat it and set it on fire. So that is not typically happening in the United States, but there are certainly other things. Like if we look at the Proud Boys and this whole movement of white nationalism and the chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." Like I would say that anti-Semitism, at least in my life, is where it's worse than it's been since I've been alive. So, I don't know. I think it's a problem everywhere.
Maybe in what you're saying, how much is this part of our culture? Just we have like somebody scapegoat. Are we more in that area now? It feels. I mean, sometimes it feels that way when you see
Right.
things on TV, but that need to blame somebody
Absolutely. And I didn't talk much about scapegoating. I've got a whole nother hour-long presentation just about that. But we're weird animals, humans. We got to blame somebody for something, and we're afraid of what's different. I think it's evolutionary tribalism, this idea that if you're not with us, you're against us, when that is historically absolutely not true. We're better with all kinds of diversity and difference, and so I'm sure some of it is definitely human nature, and I think of history kind of like this, right? Like we have peaks and valleys, but I also think that that arc of justice is long, or the arc of morality is long, but it does bend towards justice, right? Like I grew up here was my mom. I would complain about something or have a bad day or be sad, and she'd see it. You know, we're not on a death march in Auschwitz. So like that perspective is super important. I was having a rough time with things happening at West this week for lots of reasons. And my colleague did get to go see the hidden child survivor. And he was telling me part of his story, and I was just like, gosh, thank you for that. I really needed that perspective today. So I think, yeah, humans are, we have a tendency to be real awful to each other, but just more so good to each other. So I think it's, yeah, we're just weird animals. I don't know. Go ahead.
I have a friend who commented yesterday that he thought that some of the increase in anti-Semitism was related to economic hardships.
That is typically a scapegoat during economic hardships. Jews get blamed for that historically, for sure. I would also say that there have been things in our country that have been normalized over the last 10 years that you weren't allowed to say previously, and that has emboldened people to act and speak in ways that they maybe wouldn't have before.
It also feels like one of the things that we're taught as we're growing up, and we have maybe totally embraced by the time we become adults, that you probably should just keep quiet. Don't open your mouth. Don't turn the spotlight on yourself by saying something that maybe takes some courage, but maybe there'll be some repercussions if you do. And but it also seems that, especially in the context of history, we should be taught that, yes, we're supposed to speak up. You don't totally isolate yourself and endanger yourself if you do. But my sense is that people have the opposite feeling, just shrink back into the shadows, into the crowds, and don't be out there all by yourself.
Absolutely, it's way safer. It's way safer to not say anything and to just keep your head down, right? Like 97% of Poland during the Holocaust did nothing to help. 97%. That's a huge number because it was safer. And that's just it's the same today. Somebody says something ignorant, and it's just easier to not engage. But I think we have to be brave. We have to do those scary things. Nobody ever resisted or helped without putting themselves in some kind of danger. And I think, yeah, it's absolutely human nature. Like it's just easier, it's safer, right?
Easier, but I even think of some of my friends who might tell me about an incident that they witnessed, and you have a moment of decision what you're going to do or not do, and I don't know, maybe people do think first and foremost of their own safety, but they know it's wrong, but there's something inherent in our nature also that we've learned. Don't get involved, don't bother with them, just ignore it.
Absolutely.
I know sometimes I've asked
myself would question if I had lived in Europe at that time, would it help? Would I? You know, because it is a personal, you put your family at risk as well as yourself. And, you know, I just think the great some of those people who do what they did, who existed. And it, when I compare it, not just what we stand up and say it like, well, yeah, I can do that.
That's huge. That's super huge. And we can't now, right? Like, we can never put ourselves in that headspace of what would I have done. But what can we do now? Like, that's huge. There's all kinds of injustice happening, and we have control. We don't, like, we can't do everything, but we can do something. You can always do something, right? Yeah, that's huge.
Your comment about the little tag on your ID that says hope, and then your comment up there that says stand up, and then remembering the examples of what happened here almost 30 years ago, that we have an example in this community of how to respond. Many of you here may or may not have been here in 1993. I see a lot of heads shaking, yes. So that is a positive response, and I think one that we need to model more frequently. But I think whether it's Jews or blacks or Native Americans or whoever it is, there are always going to be people who are targeted, because there are always going to be people who are unhappy with whatever their circumstances are. And this is a way that they survive, by attacking somebody else.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Like, that's such a huge, beautiful part of our town, and that gives me hope for sure.
Lacy, I just wanted to tag on your comment about your students, because I have been in your classroom and I agree with you. I do want to make an additional comment about the Pioneer Park situation. There are those students, and so I hope that you can enlist your students to stand up and be seen, because they are the future, and the others doing this kind of stuff have to be recognized as that is something to stand up against. And so I hope that you can take that message back, because I've been in all middle schools and high schools, and I see what you see, but I also see what she has witnessed. And I think we need our young people to carry that banner and give us hope.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So my seniors, my second semester literature of the Holocaust class, their final project is an action project. Like, you just learned all of these really important things. Now what? So hopefully some of that is not being a bystander, being an upstander. Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned a couple books. Do you actually have?
I have in the past. Yeah. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Sure, you bet. And I can put my email up here right now. You just want to email me, I can send you a read. Oh, the power of the internet. There you go. Yeah, if you have questions, like, feel free, please. This is the thing I care about, I mean, other than my family, the most. Yeah. Anybody else?
As I think back